The evening sky was the color of fading gold when Daniel sat by the piano in his small house. His fingers moved slowly over the keys, playing a melody that seemed to carry both love and sorrow. The song wasn't written on paper. It lived only in his memory, the memory of her. Lila had always said this tune made her feel safe. She'd sit beside him, eyes half closed, and whisper, "When you play this, I feel like the world stops moving." He used to laugh softly and say, "Then I'll play it forever." But forever didn't last long. They were supposed to get married in just 3 weeks. The invitations were ready. The white dress hung in her mother's room, and Daniel had even rented the small church where they'd first met. Life felt like a song that was just reaching its most beautiful note. Then suddenly silence. The phone call came one rainy night. A stranger's voice. A broken sentence. An accident. When Daniel reached the hospital, the world had already ended for him. Lila was gone. Her mother's hands were shaking as she signed the papers. The doctor kept talking, but Daniel heard nothing. Just the echo of the song he used to play for her. Days turned into nights without meaning. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. His home was filled with wedding decorations, white flowers that were beginning to wilt. On what should have been their wedding day, he sat at the piano staring at the keys, unable to touch them. But something inside him whispered that he had to keep a promise. At the funeral, when the last handful of soil was laid over her grave, Daniel placed a small keyboard beside the flowers. He didn't speak to anyone, not even her family. He just looked down and said softly, "I'll come every year. I'll play for you the way I promised." People thought he was just saying it out of grief. They assumed he would move on like most people do, that one day he'd find someone new, maybe even smile again. But Daniel wasn't most people. The first year after her death was the hardest. He still went to work, teaching music at the small community school, but everyone could see the emptiness in his eyes. When he spoke to his students, his voice was gentle but distant, as if he was always listening to something else, something far away. On Lila's first birthday after her passing, Daniel carried his keyboard to the old cemetery on the hill. It was a windy afternoon, and the sky looked heavy with clouds. The grass was damp, and the flowers on her grave had faded. He sat on the ground, brushed away a few fallen leaves, and started to play. The same song. The same promise. It was quiet all around, only the soft hum of the wind mixing with his music. And though he was alone, Daniel felt something in the air, something warm, almost like a presence. When the last note faded, he smiled faintly through tears. "Happy birthday," he whispered. Then he closed his keyboard and walked home. That was the beginning of the ritual that would define his life. Every year, without missing one, Daniel visited that same grave on Lila's birthday. He never invited anyone, never told anyone why he kept doing it. Some of the locals began to notice. The man who ran the nearby flower shop started setting aside a small bouquet of lilies every October because he knew Daniel would come. Children from the town would sometimes see him walking up the hill carrying his keyboard case and whisper, "There goes the man who plays for the dead." But no one ever disturbed him. There was a quiet respect for the man and his music. As the years went by, life around Daniel changed. Friends moved away, the school got new teachers, and his hair began to turn gray, yet nothing changed inside him. His home was still filled with pictures of Lila, her smiling face, her handwritten notes, the small drawing she had made of a piano with the words, "Play for me forever," written underneath. He never remarried. People tried to set him up, thinking love could heal him, but Daniel always smiled politely and said, "My heart already has a home." Each visit to the grave felt like a conversation with her. Sometimes he told her about his students, the shy ones who played out of tune, the bold ones who thought they knew everything. Other times he spoke about the weather, or how the old tree near her grave had grown taller every year. And then he would play. His music carried emotion words couldn't express. Listeners, if there ever were any, would feel that deep ache in every note. The melody rose softly, then fell like a sigh, carrying both love and longing. The people in town began to mark time by him. "It's almost October," they'd say. "Daniel will be playing soon." It became something of a legend, the story of a man who kept playing for the woman he loved, even after 20 years. But Daniel never thought of himself as a legend. To him, he was just keeping his promise. One cold autumn evening, 20 years after Lila's death, Daniel found himself sitting at the same spot once again. The sun had already dipped behind the trees, and the cemetery was bathed in soft golden light. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the keyboard. The plastic felt colder than usual. He stared at the name carved into the stone, Lila Morgan, 1978-1999, and for a long moment he said nothing. He just breathed slowly, letting the air fill with memories. 20 years, he whispered. I kept my promise, Lila. He started to play, but his fingers didn't move as smoothly as before. The years had made them stiff, but the melody still came alive. It was as if his hands remembered what his heart could never forget. The notes floated through the quiet air, each one carrying a story. To anyone passing by, it would sound like a sad tune, but to Daniel, it was full of hope, a way of keeping her close, even when the world had taken her away. As the music filled the evening, a few leaves drifted down from the trees. The wind grew gentle, almost like it was listening. Daniel smiled faintly. For the first time in years, he felt something warm inside him. Maybe it was peace. When the song ended, he sat there quietly. The air was still. The world seemed to hold its breath. And in that stillness, Daniel felt as though Lila was near. Not as a ghost, not as a dream, but as a feeling that wrapped around him, soft and familiar. He touched the gravestone gently and whispered, I'll come again next year, I promise. As he walked down the hill, the town lights began to glow in the distance. The sound of his footsteps mixed with the soft rustle of the wind. Behind him, the graveyard stood silent, but the air seemed alive with the echo of his music, lingering like a gentle goodbye. That night, Daniel sat by his piano again at home. He didn't play anything new, just ran his fingers across the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness of them. For a brief moment, he imagined Lila standing beside him, smiling, her hand resting on his shoulder. He looked at the empty chair next to the piano and whispered, You'd still laugh at me for missing a note, wouldn't you? A small laugh escaped his lips, quiet and broken but real. It was the kind of laugh that came from both love and pain. He turned off the light and sat there in the dim glow from the window, listening to the soft sound of the wind outside. 20 years. 20 birthdays. 20 songs played for the one he could never forget. Daniel didn't know it yet, but something was about to change. Something that would shake everything he thought he knew. For now he was just a man with a keyboard and a promise that had kept him alive. Even as the world moved on without him, and somewhere, far away, in another town under the same night sky, a woman was waking from a dream filled with the sound of music, a melody she somehow remembered, though she didn't know why. Daniel woke early that morning, the soft light of dawn slipping through the curtains. For a few seconds he forgot what day it was. Then his eyes fell on the small keyboard case leaning against the wall, and it all came back. 20 years. He made himself a cup of coffee, though he barely drank it. His hands were slower now, and his reflection in the kitchen window looked older, lonelier. But there was still something gentle in his face, a quiet peace that only people who have loved deeply seem to have. By mid-morning, he put on his old brown coat, picked up the flowers from the corner shop, and started walking toward the cemetery. The shopkeeper, an elderly man who had seen him do this for years, gave a small nod and said softly, Same time, same song? Daniel smiled faintly. Always the same. The path up the hill was covered in fallen leaves, glowing orange and yellow under the weak autumn sun. It was a beautiful day, one of those calm days where even the wind seems to move slowly. When he reached the grave, he knelt down, brushed the dirt from her name, and placed the bouquet gently. He sat on the small stool he always brought and set up his keyboard. For a moment he just looked around. The air was still. A few birds chirped from the trees nearby. Then he began to play. The sound of the melody filled the space around him, soft and full of emotion. Each note carried 20 years of love, loss, and longing. His eyes stayed closed most of the time. He didn't need to look at the keys. His hands knew the song by heart. As he played, he felt the same calmness he always did. It was like the rest of the world faded away, and only the two of them were there, him and her. But this time, something was different. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed someone standing by the old gate of the cemetery. It was a woman standing very still, watching him. She wasn't close enough for him to see her face clearly, but he could tell she was younger, maybe in her 30s. She wore a faded green coat, the same shade Lila used to wear in the fall. He thought nothing of it at first. Sometimes people came to watch or listen from afar, but as the music went on, she didn't move. She just stood there, hands in her pockets, head slightly tilted as if trying to remember something. When the song ended, Daniel sighed softly and closed his keyboard. He looked toward the gate again. The woman was still there. She began to walk slowly toward him. Her steps were careful, hesitant. Daniel stood up politely, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice gentle. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's all right," Daniel replied. "I was just finishing." She smiled faintly. "That song. It's beautiful." "Thank you," he said quietly. It was her favorite. He nodded toward the gravestone. The woman looked down at the name engraved there. She seemed to study it for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Lila Morgan." Daniel nodded. "You knew her?" The woman hesitated. "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm not sure." Her answer caught him off guard. He frowned slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" She looked at him, her eyes uncertain but full of emotion. "I don't remember much about my past," she said. "I woke up in a hospital months ago. They told me I was in an accident. I didn't know who I was or where I came from. But lately," she paused, searching for words. "Lately I keep hearing this melody in my dreams. Over and over. And when I heard you playing just now," her voice trembled. It was the same song. Daniel stared at her, his heart beating faster. "The same song?" She nodded. "Exactly the same." For a moment neither of them spoke. The wind moved softly through the trees. Daniel felt like the ground beneath him wasn't real. He looked closer at her face. There was something hauntingly familiar about her. The way her eyes curved slightly when she blinked, the small scar near her eyebrow. But it couldn't be. It wasn't possible. "What's your name?" he asked finally. She hesitated again, as if even that was uncertain. "They call me Lena," she said quietly. "Lena Moreau. But I don't know if that's my real name." Daniel tried to steady his voice. "Where did you come from?" "Vermont," she said. "I was found near the woods after a storm. No ID, no phone, nothing. They said I must have been wandering for a while before someone called for help. The doctors think I had memory loss from a head injury." She looked down at the grave again, then back at him. "I don't know why, but when I saw this place from the road earlier today, I felt like I had to come in. And then I heard you playing." Daniel's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. His heart wanted to believe something his mind refused to accept. "I've played this song every year for 20 years, he said slowly. "I wrote it for her." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I think I've heard it before. I remember someone playing it while I was laughing. I don't know where, but I remember the sound." Her voice broke slightly, and Daniel felt a wave of emotion rush through him. Disbelief, hope, fear, everything at once. He took a small step closer. "You remind me of someone I lost," he said carefully. She met his gaze. "Lila?" He nodded. "Yes." For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves and the faint hum of wind. Lena touched the gravestone gently, running her fingers over the letters of Lila's name. Then she looked at Daniel again. "I don't know who I am," she said. "But if there's even a small chance that I'm her, I need to know." Daniel's hands shook slightly. "Lila died in a car accident," he said quietly. "They found her car near the river. They said she didn't make it," Lena frowned. "Was her body ever found?" He hesitated. "They said it was. The police told us the car went into the water. The body was badly injured, but they identified her by her ring." Lena looked at her hand. There was a faint tan line on her ring finger, as if something had once been there. "I don't know why," she said softly, "but I've always felt like I lost something important. Something I couldn't remember." Daniel felt dizzy. He took a slow breath, trying to stay calm. "Maybe we should get some help," he said carefully. "Someone who can check this properly." Lena nodded. "I've already spoken to doctors about my memory loss. They said I could try DNA testing to find my family." She paused, her voice low. Would you be willing to help me with that?" Daniel hesitated. His heart told him yes instantly, but his mind was still afraid. What if it wasn't her? What if this was just a cruel coincidence? But as he looked at her again, at the way she stood, the way her eyes seemed to search his face, Something inside him whispered, "What if it is her?" He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I'll help you." A small smile appeared on her lips, full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood there for a while, neither moving, both lost in thought. The air around them seemed charged, like the calm before a storm. When they finally left the cemetery, Daniel walked beside her, still silent. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his chest. That night he couldn't sleep. The sound of her voice, the look in her eyes, everything reminded him of Lila. He sat by the piano again, touching the keys gently, trying to calm his thoughts. He played the melody once more, softly this time, almost like a whisper. Halfway through the song, he stopped and looked at the photograph of Lila on the shelf. "What's happening, Lila?" he whispered. "Is it really you?" Outside, the wind blew through the trees, making them sway gently. Somewhere in the distance, a faint sound echoed, almost like humming. And miles away, in a small rented room, Lena sat awake by the window, humming the same tune without even realizing it. Daniel woke up early the next morning with a strange heaviness in his chest. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that woman, Lena, standing by the grave, her voice trembling as she said she didn't remember who she was. It had been 20 years since he'd spoken her name out loud to anyone. Now there was a chance, however impossible, that she might still be alive. The thought both terrified and comforted him. He made coffee but didn't drink it. His hands shook as he turned the small silver ring over and over in his fingers. Lila's ring, the one they said had been found at the crash site. Could they have been wrong? Could someone else's body have been mistaken for hers? The idea made his heart race, but he pushed it away. He couldn't let hope destroy him again. Hope had already broken him once. Later that day, he decided to visit the town library. It was quiet, and he knew the librarian, who still remembered him from when he used to come in with Lila years ago. He asked if he could look at old newspaper articles from 1999, around the time of the accident. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just handed him a small box of clippings. As he went through the yellowed papers, his heart pounded harder. There it was, the story. Local woman dies in river crash. Beneath the title was a blurry black and white picture of Lila's car, half submerged near the old bridge. He read every word carefully. The article said the car had been found 2 days after the storm. The driver's body was badly damaged but was identified by a ring and personal belongings. There was no mention of DNA testing, because back then, in small towns like theirs, they rarely did that. Daniel sat back in the chair, staring at the paper. It could have been a mistake. Someone else could have been in that car. He felt a rush of dizziness and quickly closed the box. For years, he'd lived with one version of the truth, that she was gone. Now, for the first time, that truth was cracking open. That evening, he called the number Lena had written down for him. His voice shook when he heard her answer. "Hello, it's me," he said softly. "Daniel," she sounded relieved. "I was hoping you'd call." They met the next day at a small cafe near the park. It was quiet, the kind of place where no one hurried. When he saw her walk in, wearing the same green coat, his chest tightened. She smiled nervously. "I hope this isn't too strange." "It's strange," he admitted. "But maybe that's okay." They sat down by the window. The waitress brought coffee, but neither of them touched it. Lena told him more about her recovery, how she'd spent months in the hospital after being found near a storm-damaged road. How she had woken up not knowing her name, not knowing why the sound of a piano made her cry. "I tried to move on," she said softly. "But I kept dreaming about a song. I'd wake up and feel like someone was calling me through it." Daniel's throat tightened. "It was always that same melody." She nodded. "The exact one you played." He told her about his promise, about coming to the grave every year, about how people thought he'd lost his mind. "You didn't," she said gently. "You were holding on." Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes were full of tears. "Maybe, or maybe I just didn't know how to let go." There was silence between them for a while, the kind that felt heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Lena spoke again, her voice careful. "Do you think it's possible?" He looked at her. "That you're her?" She nodded. He hesitated. "I don't know, but I want to find out." They agreed to do a DNA test, something simple and clear. She already had a hospital contact in Vermont who could help. Daniel would provide a sample, compared against old medical records of Lila's that her mother had kept. As they talked, Daniel noticed small things, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she smiled when she was thinking. Every little gesture felt familiar, as if he was watching Lila through a dream. When they said goodbye, she reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you for believing me," she said quietly. "I don't know what I believe yet," he admitted, "but I believe something brought you here for a reason." She smiled. "I feel that too." Days passed slowly after that. Daniel found himself replaying every word of their conversation in his mind. He tried to keep busy, teaching, cleaning, playing the piano, but everything reminded him of her. One evening, he found an old videotape in his drawer. It was from their engagement party. He hadn't watched it in years. He set it in the old player and sat on the couch. The screen flickered, showing a younger version of himself laughing, holding Lila's hand. Her voice filled the room, warm, full of life. She looked into the camera and said, "If he ever forgets me, I'll find him again, somehow." Daniel froze. His heart seemed to stop. He rewound it, played it again and again. "I'll find him again, somehow." Was that what was happening now? He turned off the TV and sat in silence, staring at the empty space beside him. For the first time in years, he whispered, "If it's really you, I'm still here." 2 weeks later, Lena called. Her voice sounded both nervous and excited. "They got the results," she said. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the phone. "And?" "There's something strange," she said. "The DNA shows a near-perfect match to Lila Morgan's mother. They said it's either her or someone very closely related." Daniel sat down, his knees weak. "What does that mean?" "They think I might actually be her." The world seemed to go silent. He couldn't speak for a long moment. His mind raced through memories, flashes of laughter, the last goodbye, the 20 years of music. Finally, he whispered, "You're saying you're her." "I don't know how," she said softly. "But the doctors are saying it's possible I survived and lost my memory. That maybe the body they found back then wasn't me." He covered his face with his hands. 20 years, he said under his breath. "I played for you for 20 years." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "And maybe that's what brought me back." When they met again, the world felt different. Daniel couldn't stop looking at her, as if afraid she might vanish if he blinked. They walked to the same cemetery together. It was quiet, the grass wet from the rain. Lena stopped in front of the gravestone and the one with her name carved in stone. She reached out and touched it gently. "I don't know who's buried here," she said softly, "but it's not me." Daniel stood beside her, lost for words. "It's strange," she continued. "I feel like I've been gone a long time, like I've missed something important." He turned to her, his eyes filled with emotion. "You didn't miss anything," he said quietly. "I was still here." She looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. "You waited," he smiled faintly. "I promised." They stood there for a long while, listening to the wind moving through the trees. Then Daniel opened his keyboard case, his hands trembling. "Would you like to hear the song again?" he asked. She nodded. As the first notes filled the air, something in her face changed. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if the music was unlocking something deep inside her. Halfway through the song, she began to hum, softly at first, then stronger. The same tune, perfectly in sync with him. Daniel's heart pounded. Tears blurred his vision, but he didn't stop playing. He just listened to the sound of her voice, the voice he thought he'd lost forever. When the song ended, there was only silence. Then she whispered, "I remember this. You played it the night before the wedding. You said it was ours." Daniel couldn't speak. He just looked at her, trembling. "You remember," she nodded slowly. "Not everything, but enough." He reached out and she took his hand. The cemetery, the grave, the years between them. Everything felt small compared to that moment. For 20 years he had played for her memory. Now he was playing for her heart, and somewhere deep inside both of them knew the story wasn't over. It had just begun again. For days after that visit to the grave, Daniel and Lena met often. Sometimes they sat by the river and talked for hours. Sometimes they said very little, just watched the water move. There was still so much they didn't understand. But being near each other felt right, like two missing pieces finding their place again after years of searching. The doctors wanted to run more tests, and Daniel agreed. They said that amnesia cases like hers were rare, but not impossible. Sometimes trauma could erase years of memory. Sometimes a person could build a whole new life without remembering the old one. But this case was different. 20 years, it didn't make sense. And yet there she was, breathing, smiling, remembering little pieces that only Lila could have known. One afternoon, Lena showed him a small box she had found among her belongings in Vermont. Inside was a silver bracelet with a charm shaped like a small piano key. When Daniel saw it, his hands began to tremble. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly. "It was with me when they found me," she said. "They said it must have been important." He touched it gently. "I gave this to her," he whispered. "The night I proposed." Lena looked down at it, her eyes filling with emotion. "Then it's mine," she said quietly. Daniel didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was like proof, but at the same time it raised more questions. If she truly was Lila, then whose body had been buried in her place all these years? He called the police the next morning. It was a strange conversation, trying to explain that the woman buried under that grave might not be who they thought. At first, they didn't take him seriously, but when he mentioned the DNA results and the hospital records, they agreed to reopen the case. A detective from the city came to speak with them. He was kind but cautious, listening quietly as Daniel and Lena told the story from the beginning. The accident, the grave, the 20 years, and the strange meeting at the cemetery. When they finished, he said, "If what you're saying is true, there's been a major mistake. We'll have to verify everything." They authorized a small exhumation of the grave, and within days, new forensic tests confirmed it. The body buried there was not Lila Morgan. The news spread quickly around town. People who had once pitied Daniel now didn't know what to think. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered that it was impossible. But for Daniel, the only thing that mattered was that she was standing there beside him, real and alive. Even though the truth brought peace, it also brought confusion. Lena still didn't remember everything. Her memories came in flashes, a song, a laugh, a kitchen filled with morning light. But sometimes she would pause mid-conversation, her face distant as if she were trying to reach something that was still just out of her grasp. One evening, they sat together at Daniel's house. The same house he had lived in all these years. It looked almost the same as before. The piano in the corner, the framed photo on the wall, the curtain she had chosen long ago still hanging by the window. "I can't believe you kept all this," she said softly. Walking around the room, he smiled faintly. "I didn't have the heart to change it." She touched the piano keys gently. "I remember this," she whispered. "The night you first played for me." Her words made him freeze. "You remember that?" "Yes," she said, her eyes distant. "We were in the school music room. You said you'd written the song for me, but you weren't sure if it was any good." Daniel laughed softly. "You told me it was perfect, even though I played the wrong chord in the middle." She smiled. "You always did that when you got nervous." That night they played together for the first time in 2 decades. Daniel at the piano, Lena humming softly beside him. The sound filled the room, warm and familiar. For a while it felt like time had folded in on itself, like no years had passed at all. Afterward she sat quietly, watching him. "How did you keep going all these years?" she asked. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't, not really. I just kept playing. It was the only thing that still made sense." She reached over and touched his arm. "You waited for me," she said softly. "All this time." He smiled sadly. "I didn't know I was waiting. I just couldn't let go." Over the next few weeks, the two of them began trying to piece her past together. The police investigation uncovered something strange. Another missing person from the same night. A woman whose car was found near the same river. She had been traveling alone, and her identity had never been fully confirmed. It seemed almost certain now that the body mistaken for Lila's had been that woman. The truth was heartbreaking, but it explained everything. Lena's life after the crash, though, remained a mystery. The doctors believed she had survived but had wandered away, disoriented, and been found later by a family who cared for her without ever knowing her real name. Somewhere along the line, she must have adopted the name Lena Moreau, trying to start over when her memory never returned. One day, Daniel received a letter from the hospital that had treated her years ago. Inside was a short note from a nurse who remembered her. It said she used to sit by the window and hum a song. We never knew where it came from, but she played it every morning on a small keyboard we gave her. Daniel read the note 3 times, his eyes stung with tears. Even when she couldn't remember him, the music had stayed. That evening, he drove with her to the old bridge, the place where the accident had happened. The air was cool, and the sound of the river below was steady and calm. Lena leaned on the railing, looking down at the water.
I used to be afraid of this place, she said softly.
Now it feels peaceful. Daniel nodded. It took everything from me, he said quietly. But it gave you back. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. I don't know why I survived, she said. But maybe it was because I still had something to come back to. He took her hand and held it tightly. Maybe it's because you never really left, he said. They stood there as the sun went down, the orange light reflecting on the water. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Back in town, the story spread like a quiet legend. The woman who came back after 20 years, the man who had never stopped playing for her. People stopped Daniel on the street, asked if it was true. He would just smile and say, sometimes love is stronger than time. At home, things slowly began to feel new again. Lena started remembering more. The taste of her favorite tea, the smell of Daniel's old cologne, the small scar on his hand from when he'd burned himself making dinner once. Every small memory that returned made her laugh or cry, sometimes both. Daniel would just hold her and whisper, "You're home now. That's all that matters." But even with all the happiness, there were moments of sadness too. 20 years is a long time to lose. Friends they once knew were gone. Her parents had passed away and the world had changed. But through it all, they had each other. One night, as they sat outside watching the stars, Lena said quietly, "It's strange. I feel like I've lived 2 lives. One before the river and one after." Daniel nodded. "And both of them led you back here." She smiled. "I guess some promises really do last forever." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Do you want to hear something funny? The night before the wedding, you made me promise that no matter what happened, I'd never stop playing for you." She laughed, tears in her eyes. "And you didn't." "No," he said, smiling back. "I never did." The wind moved through the trees, gentle and warm. Daniel stood up, walked inside, and brought out his keyboard. "Let's play it one more time," he said. She nodded, her smile glowing under the starlight. As the first notes floated through the quiet night, it didn't sound like a song for the dead anymore. It sounded like a song for life, for love that had refused to fade, even when everything else had changed. And when the last note faded into the night, Daniel looked at her and whispered, "Welcome home." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder. Her eyes closed, her voice barely a whisper. "I never really left," she said. For the first time in 20 years, Daniel believed it completely. Daniel's days began to feel lighter again. For years, the mornings had been heavy with silence, but now he woke up to the soft sound of her voice humming in the kitchen. It still amazed him every time he saw her standing there, alive, moving around his home as if no time had passed at all. Lena had begun to rebuild her life piece by piece. She started keeping a small notebook beside the bed where she wrote down every memory that came back. Sometimes just a few words, sometimes an entire scene from years ago. Daniel often found her sitting by the window in the morning sun, reading through those pages, smiling quietly to herself. "I don't want to forget again," she said once. "You won't," Daniel replied softly. They spent most days together, exploring the town she barely remembered. He took her to the old bakery, to the little park where they'd had picnics, and even to the school where they had met so long ago. Most of the places had changed, but every now and then something familiar would make her stop and close her eyes, like a door unlocking inside her mind. At the small music shop near the corner, she ran her fingers over a display of keyboards. "I used to play here, didn't I?" "You did," Daniel said. "You taught the children every summer." A smile touched her lips. "That's why they called me Miss Melody," she said with a soft laugh. "I remember that now." It became a habit. Every new memory they unlocked felt like a small victory. But not everything was easy. Sometimes a smell or a song would bring back a flash that overwhelmed her, and she would tremble until Daniel held her close and reminded her that she was safe now. One night, as rain poured softly outside, Lena asked a question that caught him off guard. "Do you think the world just paused for us?" He looked at her, unsure what she meant. "I mean," she said, turning to face him, How can 20 years pass and somehow we end up back here? The same people, the same love. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe love doesn't follow time, he said. Maybe it waits, she nodded slowly. I think that's true. Because even when I didn't remember you, I used to dream about a song. I didn't know where it came from, but I always felt peace when I played it. I think that was you, he didn't answer. He just took her hand and kissed her fingers gently. Sometimes silence said more than words ever could. As weeks turned into months, Lena began to feel stronger. She even joined Daniel during his evening performances at a nearby cafe. At first, people came out of curiosity. The story of the man who played for his lost love for 20 years, and the woman who came back had spread far and wide. But soon they came for the music itself. Their duets were simple but full of heart. Daniel would play softly, and Lena would hum or sing along. Every song told a story and of loss, hope, and finding light again. The audience would sit quietly, moved by something deeper than just notes or lyrics. It felt real because it was. One evening after a show, an older woman approached them. She had tears in her eyes. I lost my husband last year, she said softly, and for a long time I stopped believing in anything good. But watching you two tonight, I think maybe love never really ends. Lena smiled gently and hugged her. It doesn't, she said. Sometimes it just takes the long way home. Those words stayed with Daniel. The long way home. That was exactly what this had been. A long, painful road that somehow led them right back to each other. As time went on, Lena started teaching music again. She took small groups of children in the afternoons and taught them simple melodies. Her laughter filled the rooms, and Daniel would watch her from the doorway, quietly amazed by how naturally she fit back into life. Still, there were moments when she looked out the window with a faraway expression. Once he asked what she was thinking. I lost 20 years, she said. Sometimes I wonder what kind of person I was in all that time. Who I became when I didn't remember who I was. Daniel sat beside her. Who you were doesn't matter, he said gently. Who you are now, that's what counts. She nodded slowly. You're right. But still I want to make up for it, for all the moments I missed. He smiled. Then let's start now. So they did. They traveled to places they had always talked about but never visited. The mountains, the seaside, the small towns she'd once dreamed of painting. Everywhere they went, Daniel carried his small keyboard, and every night, they would play under the open sky. People who heard their music often stopped to listen, not knowing their story but feeling something special in the sound. One night, while sitting on a quiet beach, Lena said softly, You know what's strange? I don't feel like 20 years were taken from me. I feel like I was just waiting for the right time to live again. Daniel looked at her, his eyes warm. Maybe that's what all this was, and a pause before the music started again. She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. Then let's never stop playing. Months later, the police investigation finally concluded. They confirmed everything. The woman buried under her name had indeed been someone else, and a tragic mix-up after the accident had caused the mistake. There would be a quiet reburial for that woman's family, and they sent Daniel a formal letter apologizing for the years of confusion. Daniel didn't need the apology. What mattered was that the truth had been found. On the anniversary of the day she had died, they returned to the graveyard. The stone still stood, weathered by time. Daniel had thought about replacing it, but Lena told him not to. Let it stay, she said. It's a reminder of what we overcame. She placed a single white rose on the grave and whispered, Thank you, whoever you were. Because of you, I found my way home. Daniel played softly beside her, just as he had for 2 decades. But this time it wasn't a song of grief. It was one of gratitude. As the melody filled the air, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the gravestone in light. A few people passing by stopped to listen. They didn't know the full story, but they could feel something in the air, something gentle and powerful all at once. Later, as they walked back down the hill, Lena said, You know, all those years you played for me, maybe I heard it somehow. Daniel smiled quietly. Maybe you did. He had always believed that music could reach beyond words, beyond time. Now he knew it could reach even further, across the space between life and loss, and bring someone back home. Back at the house, the evening was calm. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. Lena sat at the piano, her hands moving gracefully over the keys. Daniel watched her, thinking how she had once been a memory. Now she was here, living, breathing, laughing. After she finished playing, she turned to him and said softly, "Do you ever wonder why we got a second chance?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Maybe because we weren't finished yet," he said. "Maybe love didn't want to end halfway." She smiled. "Then let's promise never to waste another moment." He reached for her hand. "Deal." That night, as the two of them played their old song one more time, it didn't sound like the music of two people trying to remember their past. It sounded like a promise, a quiet vow to live every day as if they had just been given the gift of time itself. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. The light from the window spilled across the garden where Daniel had once sat alone for years, playing to the silence. Now that same garden echoed with laughter and song. He looked at her, his heart full. "I spent 20 years talking to the stars," he said quietly. "Now I don't have to." Lena smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm right here," she whispered, and for the first time, those words felt like the final note to a song he'd been writing his whole life. As the night deepened, the melody carried softly through the house, not a song of sorrow but of peace. A song for all the years lost and all the ones still waiting ahead. And in that moment, it didn't matter how much time had passed. What mattered was that love had found its way back, note by note, heartbeat by heartbeat, until the music finally led them home again. Years passed, but somehow the love between Daniel and Lena only grew stronger. What they shared wasn't like the excitement of young love anymore. It was something quieter, deeper, like the steady glow of a candle that never burned out. Their days were filled with small, ordinary moments that meant everything. Breakfast together at the little kitchen table, walks by the river in the evenings, music drifting softly from the piano every night before bed. After all the years of loss and waiting, peace had finally found its way back into their lives. Lena's memory never came back completely, but she didn't mind anymore. The missing pieces didn't feel like holes, they were simply part of who she had become. She often said that maybe she wasn't meant to remember everything, because now she could make new memories that mattered even more. One summer morning, she and Daniel sat on the porch watching the sunrise. The sky was painted with pink and gold, and a soft breeze carried the smell of wildflowers from the garden. "You know," she said quietly, "every time I see a sunrise, I feel like it's a second chance. Like the world is saying, wind, start again." Daniel smiled. "That's exactly what you did," she laughed gently. "No, that's what we did." They spent that day together like any other, laughing and talking, unaware that something special was about to happen. That evening, a young man knocked on their door holding a small bouquet of lilies. He introduced himself as Peter, a filmmaker from the nearby town. "I've heard your story," he said. "Everyone has. I'm working on a short documentary about real love stories, and yours feels like one the world needs to hear." Daniel hesitated. He had always been a quiet man, not comfortable with attention. But Lena touched his arm and said softly, "Maybe it's time we share it. Maybe someone out there needs hope the way we did." So they agreed. Over the next few weeks, Peter visited often with his camera. He recorded them playing music, walking by the river, telling their story. At first, it felt strange to speak their memories out loud, but soon, it became a healing thing. When the documentary was finally finished, Peter invited them to a small screening at the town hall. Friends, neighbors, and strangers filled the seats. Daniel and Lena sat in the front row, holding hands as the lights dimmed. On the screen, their story unfolded: the accident, the years of loneliness, the music at the grave, and the impossible reunion. People in the audience wept quietly. Even Daniel, who rarely cried, felt his eyes fill as he saw himself from years ago, sitting at that grave in the rain, still playing. When the film ended, the crowd stood and clapped. Some came up to hug them. Others whispered words of thanks. One young woman said, "I stopped believing in love after I lost someone, but now, I think maybe it's still out there." Lena smiled at her and said, "It always is. You just have to keep listening for it." The film spread far beyond their small town. It was shared online, translated into other languages, and viewed by millions. Letters started arriving from all over the world, people thanking them for reminding them that love could survive anything. Daniel never cared about fame, but reading those letters touched him deeply. Some came from people in hospitals, others from soldiers, widows, and even children who said the story made them believe in hope again. One night, after reading a letter from a woman who had just lost her husband, Lena said softly, "We didn't just survive, Daniel. We helped someone else start healing too." He nodded. Music heals in more ways than one. Life moved gently forward. They grew older together, but time no longer frightened them. Each wrinkle, each gray hair was a sign of life, a reminder that they had made it through the impossible. Sometimes, when Lena was teaching music to her young students, she would tell them, "The most beautiful songs aren't always the perfect ones. They're the ones that come from truth." Her students loved her. They called her Miss L, and every year they begged her and Daniel to play their song at the town's spring festival. It became a tradition, one that everyone looked forward to. At the festival one year, as they finished playing their melody, a little girl in the front row asked, "Is it true you played that song every day for 20 years? Daniel smiled. "Every single day. Why?" the girl asked, her eyes wide. He looked at Lena and said, "Because sometimes love is quiet, but it never gives up. Even when you think it's gone, it finds its way back." The crowd clapped softly, and for a moment, the world seemed perfectly still. That night, back at home, Lena sat at the piano long after everyone had gone to sleep. She played softly, the same tune that had carried her across decades. Daniel came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her shoulders, and said, "You never miss a note." She smiled. "That's because I'm playing from memory," he chuckled. "You mean from the heart?" They stayed like that for a while, listening to the faint echo of the keys. Outside, the moonlight spilled across the floor, and the sound of the piano drifted through the open window, mixing with the night air. Years continued to pass. Seasons changed, the town grew, and new families moved in. People still whispered about the couple on the hill who lived quietly, played music together, and never seemed to lose their kindness. One cold winter morning, Daniel woke early to find snow falling outside. He made coffee and went to wake Lena, but she was already sitting by the piano, wrapped in a blanket, playing softly. He stood in the doorway for a while, watching her. Her hair had turned silver. Her hands were thinner now, but when she played, she still looked as radiant as the day he met her. She turned to him and said with a smile, "You know, I think this song is yours now." He shook his head. "It's ours. It always was. That winter was peaceful. They didn't travel much anymore, but they didn't need to. The world seemed to come to them through letters, visitors, and stories from people who had been touched by their music." Then, one evening, as they sat together watching the fire, Lena leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Promise me one thing, anything. When I'm gone someday, don't play for sadness. Play for joy. Play because love never really leaves, it just changes its shape." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He couldn't speak, so he just nodded. She smiled faintly. "That's all I need." Time kept moving. And one morning, the music stopped. The house felt different without her laughter, without her humming from the kitchen. But when Daniel sat at the piano, the keys still carried her touch. Her scent still lingered in the air, and her spirit felt close, as if she had never really left. He remembered her last words, and he kept his promise. Every Sunday he went to the same place, not to the old grave, but to the small garden they had planted together. He set his keyboard on the wooden bench and played her song, the same one he had once played in sorrow but now played with a smile. Neighbors would stop and listen. Some would bring flowers, others would just close their eyes and let the music wash over them. And though his hands trembled with age, his notes never faltered. One afternoon, a young woman approached him after he finished playing. "You must be Daniel," she said. "My grandmother used to tell me your story. She said you played a song so full of love it brought someone back to life." He smiled gently. "Maybe it wasn't the song that did it," he said. "Maybe it was love itself." She nodded. "Would you teach me that song?" Daniel paused, then nodded slowly. Of course, they sat together at the piano that evening. His old fingers guided hers across the keys, and as she began to learn, he felt something stir in his heart, a quiet peace, like the sound of a familiar voice carried on the wind. When the girl finally played the last note, she looked at him and said softly, "It's beautiful." He smiled. "It's a song for hope. Pass it on." Years later, long after Daniel was gone, people in the town still remembered him. Every spring at the festival, children played the same melody on stage, the song that had once brought a lost soul home. And somewhere in the echoes of those notes, it felt like Daniel and Lena were still there, smiling hand in hand, their love carried forever through the music they left behind. It was no longer a story about loss. It was a story about faith, patience, and the quiet power of a promise kept. Because in the end, love didn't die in that small town. It played on, soft and endless, in every note that touched the heart of anyone who listened.